Welcome to this video today, guys. In this one I'm going to be talking about how to maintain power and form in your kicking techniques, especially as you start to kick higher and up towards the head. Now, the reason that most people are able to kick okay when it's low but then it kind of falls apart as they go up is because there's a direct correlation between the height of a kick and the more degree of technical understanding and all of these different elements like strength in the obliques, like pivoting on the foot, driving the hip through into the technique, holding the arms in a certain position to counterbalance. All of these things work together in order to help that kick still be able to deliver power at height. And I think what it is many people train the kicks low to start with as a beginner, of course, but then don't really advance their knowledge or further their knowledge from that point, and they try to apply the same things to higher kicking, but it doesn't really work that way. Now, the high kicks are very impressive. It's what you always see in the movies and things like that. And I think it's safe to admit that really everybody, if they were honest with themselves, would like to be able to perform really dynamic and high-level kicking techniques with power and efficiency. But these techniques are often labelled as flashy by people, and people say things like, you shouldn't throw those techniques because they're not viable or they're dangerous or they're too flashy and don't work, when we've seen absolutely countless examples of people in professional competitions being absolutely devastated with head kicks and spinning kicks and things like that. Now, this doesn't just come from outsiders either, like the layman who's never trained in his life. I've often heard this statement from people actually who have quite a bit of experience in training, and even coaches themselves. Now, what most people think of with why they can't apply power to higher kicking techniques if they haven't got that kind of knowledge and experience is they immediately look to flexibility, which makes complete sense, because when you see somebody performing almost a split while stood on one leg, you're going to think flexibility straight away. It makes complete sense. But really, you actually don't need insane amounts of flexibility to be able to perform really dynamic and high kicks, and you certainly do not need to be able to do the splits either. So I'm not saying that you don't need above average flexibility, but it's not the only factor at play, and I think that's what people are looking at. They think it's just the flexibility. So there are three key areas in being able to perform these kicks like that. The first one is technique, which we're going to be focused on today. The second is flexibility, and the third is strength in the upper body and the legs. Now, I'm going to be focusing, like I said, on the technique today, but if you'd like me to cover sort of the flexibility and the strength required in different body parts to be able to go along with this, then I can do that. Just leave a comment below and let me know if you're interested in that. And what I'd recommend that you do in order to train this is you're really going to have to dedicate some specific time to training these techniques in absolute isolation. And by isolation, I mean just kind of really slowly, just absolutely going through the technique and really understanding what you're doing at each stage of the movement. So then when you build up the speed and intensity, that muscle memory is going to be there. Before we get into the practical part of this video, I just want to talk a little bit about why most martial artists never get to that really kind of elite level of kicking technique. Well, one of the reasons actually is because they're always training against something with resistance. So most martial artists only ever train their kicking techniques against a bag or against some pads or something like that. But you also need to be able to perform the kicks in absolute isolation with nothing to kind of hold you up, because if you're always training against a bag, then it allows you to get away with things that you really shouldn't be doing, like little flaws in the technique. So that's really why I'm always an advocate for kind of training things at an absolute base level, because then everything else on top of that, when it does come to hitting against targets, is going to be so much easier and your technique's going to just be so much better as well. Alright, so now I've reached the practical section of this video, and the first thing that I want to talk about is something I mentioned in the intro section, which is how most people are able to execute kicks okay when it's really low down like this. So if they're kicking into the leg or something like that. But then as they start to kick higher up and higher up, they sort of lose their form and integrity, and the kick becomes weaker and weaker the higher up they go. Now, with these side-to-side kicks, I'll call them, which would refer to something like a turning kick or a hook kick. So any kick that comes from one side or the other like this, okay, so from one direction into the center and across that center line, whatever height it's at, whether it's down at the leg or whether it's at the head, should always come in at the same position wherever they hit. However, what most people tend to do is they will start low really well, but then as the kick starts to go up, it starts to form this more upward angle like this. So the low kick will start here, but then as they kick up here, it starts becoming like this, and then by the time they get to the head, it's a really quite a steep angle like this, and obviously that's not the type of angle where you're going to be able to deliver damage. It needs to be from here and straight through the target, okay? A bit like a hook punch, obviously. Now, the reason people do that is because if I'm not pivoting on the foot, I can still throw this low kick here, which is why you can get away with it at that height, yeah? However, if I try and keep my body in this position, watch what happens to my upper body and the sort of angle of the kick as I start to get higher and higher, okay? So if I start down here, it's fine. If I go a little bit higher, it's starting to look strange already. You can see almost like it doesn't really look like a turning kick or a roundhouse kick, as it's sometimes called. It kind of is going up at this upward angle, and it's starting to look more like a front kick. And also in this position, Like, can you see how my body's kind of crunching up against my leg? That's what I like to usually refer to it as, like it's crunching up. And it's almost as if when I'm doing this, it feels like my upper and lower body are fighting each other. So my leg is trying to get into this position to deliver this kick, but my body's almost resisting against it. And it shouldn't feel like that if you're all in alignment. And that's because of the pivoting on this foot. So here is fine. Here, worse. Really high up, it just looks like a very strange front kick where I'm all sort of folded up on my body. The difference of when obviously I pivot on that foot, what this does is it allows the body to open up much more naturally. It's actually physically impossible to get into the correct kicking position if you're not pivoting your foot. You literally can't do it. The human body just doesn't move in that way, okay? So the difference is, if I'm now turning on the foot correctly, watch the difference of how these two versions look, okay? So the first one, nice and low down, probably looks quite similar. However, as I start to raise it, it still comes in from that side, from there. And then as I go really high up, you see how it still comes in and it's nice and effective. It comes in and it's got that nice sharp choppy motion, okay? From here again, nice and low. Okay, there. Okay, there. And from there, yeah? And this is the same on the front leg as well, obviously. From here, say, if that was a rear leg kick, but if I'm in this position, the same thing applies. However, I have to shift the pivot like this instead. When I'm in this position, I'll pull it through like this. However, when I'm here, I'll just shift into it instead. So from there, if I do a sort of mid-level kick here, you see I'm still coming inside from there, yeah? So I'll also show you now some lead leg hook kicks, so you can see sort of this in action with a different type of kick, okay? It's also a side-to-side kick, like I said. So the hook kick starts on this side and it comes across here. Now, if I'm low down, it's all good there, okay? I don't have to pivot all that much. However, again, just like with the turning kick, as it starts to get higher, if I don't pivot, you see this crunching up again of the body. I'm sort of like struggling against myself and it feels like I could almost kick my arm. Again, if I go really high as I can, it looks more like an axe kick. An axe kick is a straight down kick like this, and these kicks should look really, really different. A hook kick and an axe kick are nothing like each other, but when you watch a lot of martial artists that don't have that experience, they kind of all merge together and you sometimes can't identify what kick they were trying to do. Whereas the difference now, if I do it with that pivot and how it should be done, okay? So again, nice and low, all good. As soon as I get higher though and I pivot, watch the different alignment of the body. Comes down the middle and for high up. Nice and controlled. What I always advocate for kicking in all the techniques is doing as much of the work as you can very early, so that all you have to do is extend the technique. So what that means is, instead of slowly going into the technique and then kicking like this, I will very quickly pivot into that position, and then all I have to do is snap out the technique. And you want to train this pivot to be very, very fast, okay? You don't want to slowly pivot where you're kind of like a big resistance on the floor like this. Like, you want it to be very fast, and what I'll tend to do is I'll almost like hop into that position and it'll be really close from the floor. So if you watch me just do that now, how from here, how fast this pivot is, you see it, how like the foot completely spins around in just like a split second. Once again from there, and I'm ready to throw my kick out. So once again, nice and fast from there, right? And the faster you can get that turn done, obviously that's going to store up that energy to make the kick more powerful and explosive as well. So after you've done your pivot, obviously, and you've opened your hips and you're driving through, we need to then focus on the chamber, extension and re-chamber positions, which are the sort of loaded position before the kick extends, which is the chamber, the extension as it comes across the target, and then the re-chamber where you retract it back in. And many people will be quite proficient at opening the hips like this and turning in, but they'll kick with a quite slow and straight, sluggish leg. And I think that's because they haven't really understood or focused on those three sections. But if you're able to really, incorporate that chamber, extension and re-chamber, and they're very clear within each technique, then it's what makes your techniques end up being like a blade in a sense, rather than just a bat. So if you imagine a bat, it's something big and straight, whereas a blade is like a cutting motion and it's much more precise and sharp. With this, you want the chamber position to be sort of just before your target. Don't be too wide with your arc of attack, okay? So you don't want it to be really wide out here. You want to bring it forward quite straight, and obviously this builds upon that fast chamber and getting as much of the technique done as you can early, because then you can just be in your chamber position. So if you see from here, when I do that pivot and turn my hips, I'm in my chamber position within sort of two very, very quick movements, rather than coming through and them all being disjointed and then me having to lift my chamber up, okay? And obviously, because we're focusing upon high kicking in this video, you want to get that chamber nice and high up. You don't want it to be low, because if I'm trying to do a high kick and I've got a chamber down here, then I've actually got to lift it up after the fact and extend it out, and it becomes like 4 different movements, and your opponent's already ran a mile by the time you're able to do that. So lift the chamber up high, and you want to get it tucked in towards the body. So in the example of a turning kick, roundhouse kick, I want to have it on this side because the kick comes from this direction. So as I pivot, it will be this side like this. And can you see how you can see it's ready from this position to come through and extend? Okay, so from here, extend and back down, right? And for the hook kick, it would be this side because it comes across this way. But can you see how sort of like tight it is into my body, whether it's the turning kick or the hook kick? Then all I have to do is extend, and you want to let all that speed and momentum build on top of each other. You know, just like when we throw a cross and we turn through on the foot first, then, you know, we turn through our hips and then the strike comes out. So that energy all travels through the body and then filters into that final strike. It's exactly the same with the kicking techniques as well. So as I initiate the pivot from here in my first thing, this is very similar to how we push off that back foot in order to initiate our cross. So I turn through here, and then all of the energy begins to travel up my body into this position with the leg, and then snaps forward like that. And the more you can get used to this, so it's not disjointed, and disjointed means where you're doing everything in sections like and it's disjointed, and it can be, and when it can be one fluid movement, that's when you can get it really nice and whippy, okay, just like that. And the last 2 things to focus on are basically the body alignment and the positioning of your hands in order to balance you, okay? Now, the way I like to hold my hands when I do these kicks is, I like to, when I'm doing a round kick, a nice high round kick, I bring this one up to be my guard here, okay? So as I kick here, this one will be my guard, and I like to almost initiate this one to sort of rotate my body through at the same time I'm pivoting. And that, it's like you're going in opposite directions. So my leg will start here, and then as I bring this hand over, they will almost cross over like this. So watch how that goes like this, and then it kind of puts me on balance, okay? And then when I'm in that really high up position here, from here, I'm able to kick, and this hand provides balance, and that's why you put it into this position. And then obviously after you've done the kick, then you retract it back in and you're able to be nice and controlled again. And for hook kick, it's a little bit different for this one, obviously, because I'm kicking the other direction, but I'll still do something similar with my hands. So I'll lift them up here, and I will almost like bring this one over. Can you see how like the hand and the leg go in opposite directions? And that's to create balance, right? So from here, if I throw a nice relaxed fast one, and from this way, from here. So I hope you enjoyed that section of the video, and it kind of illustrated some of the things that go into doing these techniques. Some of those kind of, you know, really subtle movements of the body that you probably struggle to notice when watching somebody execute a high kick at speed. There's a lot of things that go into this, and obviously it's going to take a lot of practice, so be prepared to, you know, work hard on this. If you've got any questions or any other suggestions of content you'd like to see me create, please just leave them in the comments below. I always like interacting with you guys and kind of finding out what you think of the content I'm creating. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.